Centuries ago, Zen masters and Buddhist teachers discovered something remarkable. We spend our lives searching for peace, for wholeness, for the feeling of finally being home. And all along, what we seek has been closer than we imagined. It is here, now, hidden in plain sight. Tonight, we will journey together through ancient wisdom and gentle stories that reveal this truth. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The theme we will explore together is simple, though it may take a lifetime to fully understand. It is this: nothing is missing. Not in this moment. Not in you. The wholeness you seek, the peace you long for, has never been absent. It has only been overlooked, like the sky that is always present behind the clouds. These are not complicated teachings or difficult practices. They are quiet doorways into a truth you already sense deep within yourself. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot touch. It is not the tiredness that comes from physical labor, from a long walk, or a day of working with your hands. That kind of tiredness is honest and clean. It finds its remedy in a good night's rest. No, there is another kind of tiredness, a deeper one. It lives in the background of our lives, humming so constantly that we often forget it is there. It is the tiredness that comes from a project we began so long ago that we cannot remember starting it. The project of becoming somebody. Perhaps you know this tiredness. Perhaps you feel it now, even as you listen. The quiet exhaustion of a self that is always under construction, always being evaluated, always, in some subtle way, not quite enough. The Buddha spoke of a kind of suffering that is different from the pain of a broken bone or the grief of losing someone we love. He called it dukkha, a word that points to a subtle and persistent sense that something is wrong, something is off, something needs to be fixed or achieved or overcome before we can finally rest, before we can finally be at peace. This is the exhaustion we carry. Not the exhaustion of doing, but the exhaustion of endlessly becoming. Let us trace this tiredness back to its origins. Let us look with gentleness at how we came to feel this way. Once, you were very small. You came into this world open and undefended, knowing nothing of self-improvement or personal development. You did not lie awake at night wondering if you were living up to your potential. You simply were. You cried when you were hungry. You laughed when something delighted you. You reached for the world with curiosity and without apology. There was a naturalness to you then, a completeness. When you watched the sunlight move across a wall, you did not think about what you should be doing instead. When you played with your whole being. There was no gap between who you were and who you thought you should be. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, you began to receive messages. These messages came from those around you. They came with love, most of the time, woven into the fabric of ordinary life. But the messages came nonetheless, like seeds dropped into soft soil. The messages said, "You are special. You matter to us. We have hopes for you. And also, you could do better. You should try harder. You are not quite there yet." Let us imagine a small child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, sitting at a wooden table on a quiet afternoon. The light is soft, falling through a window. The child has been drawing for some time now, completely absorbed in what they are creating. It is a picture of a tree, or perhaps a house, or perhaps something that has no name at all, something that exists only in the vivid world of this child's imagination. They have chosen their colors carefully. Green for the leaves, or maybe purple, because why not purple? Brown for the trunk, with small lines to show the texture of bark. And there, in the corner, a yellow sun with rays stretching outward like welcoming arms. To this child, the drawing is complete. It is whole. It is an expression of something joyful that moved through them and onto the paper. They do not evaluate it. They simply made it, and now it exists, and that is enough. An adult approaches, someone the child loves and trusts. This person looks at the drawing, and perhaps they smile. Perhaps they say something kind. But then, almost as an afterthought, gently, with no ill intent, they offer a suggestion. That is lovely, but next time, try to stay inside the lines. Or perhaps, the sun is very nice, but suns are usually at the top of the picture, not the corner. Such a small moment, so easy to overlook. The adult has already moved on, thinking nothing of it, but something has shifted in the child. They look at their drawing with new eyes, not the eyes of joy and completion, but new eyes, evaluating eyes. For the first time, they see not what is there, but what is missing. Not what they have created, but how they have fallen short. A tiny crack has appeared. A small gap has opened between who they are and who they are supposed to be. This is how it begins. Not with cruelty, but with the gentlest of suggestions that we are works in progress. That we are drafts, not finished pieces. That somewhere out ahead of us is a better version of ourselves, and our job is to keep reaching for it. As the years pass, the messages multiply. They come from teachers who rank us against our peers, from friends who seem to possess something we lack, from images and stories that show us who we should want to become. The voice that once came from outside slowly moves inside, until it becomes so familiar that we mistake it for our own thoughts. You know this voice. It is the one that reviews your day, noting where you fell short. It is the one that plans tomorrow's improvements, convinced that if you just try a little harder, do a little better, become a little more of what you should be, then finally, you will arrive at a place called enough. But here is the strange thing about this place called enough. No matter how much we achieve, no matter how much we improve, it always seems to recede before us, like the horizon. We get a little closer, and it moves a little further away. The recognition comes, and we feel good for a day, a week, and then the voice returns, asking what is next. The goal is reached, and new goals appear. The self is improved, and new improvements suggest themselves. The wheel keeps turning, and we keep walking, and the horizon stays exactly where it always was, just out of reach. The Buddha observed this pattern over 2,000 years ago. He noticed that human beings are caught in a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, always reaching for the next thing, always convinced that happiness lies just around the corner. He called this the wheel of becoming, the endless round of seeking. And he saw that the wheel keeps turning not because life is cruel, but because we have not yet understood the nature of our own minds. There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition that goes like this: nothing whatsoever should be clung to. Nothing at all. At first, this can sound harsh, even cold. But look more closely, and you will find a profound compassion in these words. They are not asking us to care about nothing. They are pointing to the exhaustion that comes from gripping so tightly to our ideas about who we should be. They are offering us permission to loosen our grip. Let us explore a story that illuminates this teaching in a different way. Long ago, in a remote northern village nestled between mountains and sea, there lived a hunter who had spent his whole life in harmony with the land. He knew the rhythms of the seasons, the paths of the animals, the language of the wind and snow. He knew which plants could heal and which stars could guide a traveler home. He had never journeyed beyond the mountains that ringed his home, and he had no knowledge of the religions or philosophies of distant lands. His life was simple. He provided for his family. He respected the animals he hunted, taking only what was needed. He watched the northern lights dance across winter skies and felt something like reverence, though he had no special word for it. He did not think of himself as good or bad, spiritual or unspiritual. He simply lived, as his parents had lived, as their parents had lived before them. One day, a missionary arrived in the village. He was a kind man, sincere in his beliefs, and he had traveled a great distance across difficult terrain to share what he considered to be essential truths. He believed he was bringing a gift to these isolated people. He spoke to the villagers about matters of the soul, about right and wrong, about the ways in which human beings fall short of what they should be, about the possibility of being found wanting, of being weighed and measured and discovered to be insufficient. The hunter listened carefully to everything the missionary said. He was a thoughtful man, and he considered the words with respect. He could see that the missionary believed deeply in what he was teaching, and he honored that sincerity. But something troubled him. After the gathering, he approached the missionary with a question. "Tell me," the hunter said, "if I had never heard these teachings, if I had lived my whole life without knowing what you have told me today, would I have been found wanting? Would I have been judged for my failings?" The missionary considered this carefully. He was an honest man, and he wanted to answer truthfully. "No," he said at last. "If you truly did not know, you would not be held responsible." The hunter was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the village, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Finally, he asked, with genuine puzzlement in his voice, "Then why did you tell me?" This story is not meant to dismiss the value of spiritual teaching or the sincere desire to help others. Rather, it points to something tender and important about the human condition. Before we were taught that we were lacking, we did not experience ourselves as lacking. The sense of deficiency was learned. It was given to us, often with love, often with the best of intentions, but given nonetheless. And if it was learned, perhaps it can be seen for what it is. Perhaps the wholeness that existed before the learning is still here, still present, still available. Perhaps it never actually went anywhere at all. There is another dimension to this exhaustion that is worth exploring gently. It is not only that we feel we must improve. It is that we believe, somewhere deep down, that we must earn the right to exist, to take up space, to be loved. This belief is rarely spoken aloud. It lives beneath the surface of our conscious thoughts, shaping our choices and our reactions without our full awareness. It is the reason we sometimes work beyond what is healthy, seeking to prove our value. It is the reason we may find it difficult to receive a compliment, deflecting kind words as though we do not quite deserve them. It is a subtle weight we carry, so familiar that we have forgotten we are carrying it. The ancient teachers called this kind of clinging the root of suffering. Not the wanting of pleasant things or the avoiding of unpleasant ones, but the deeper clinging to an idea of a self that must be defended, must be improved, must be made acceptable before it can rest. As one wise teacher described it, we go through life with what might be called I and my. The I is this sense of being a special entity, separate from everything else, the center of a universe that revolves around our concerns. And the my is the ownership we claim over our experience. Not just fear, but my fear. Not just struggle, but my struggle. Not just a life, but my life, which must be shaped and polished and presented to the world as proof that I am someone worth being. And as soon as there is ing and my ing, the ancient texts tell us the whole world of separation springs into being. There is I, and there is everything that is not I. There is what I want, and what threatens what I want. There is the endless effort to protect this fragile self from a world that seems so vast and uncertain. This is why we are so tired. We are trying to hold together something that was never solid to begin with. We are gripping tightly to mist and wondering why our hands ache. But here is the good news, the teaching that has been passed down through countless generations of those who have walked this path before us. There is another way. Imagine for a moment what it might be like to set down this burden. Not through force or effort, but simply by recognizing that you have been carrying it. Imagine lying down at the end of the day and, instead of reviewing what you should have done differently, simply breathing. Simply feeling the weight of your body supported by the earth. Simply noticing that you are here, that you are alive, that this moment is happening. Imagine waking in the morning and, before the voice of self-improvement has a chance to start its familiar commentary, sensing instead the simple miracle of awareness itself. The light coming through the window, the feeling of sheets against skin, the quiet presence of being before it becomes tangled in stories of who you should be. Imagine moving through your hours not as a self under construction, but as someone already whole. Not perfect, not without room to grow and learn, but fundamentally, essentially, already enough. Already home. This is not a fantasy reserved for saints or sages who have renounced the world. It is, the great teachers tell us, our natural condition. It is what remains when we stop adding to ourselves, stop subtracting from ourselves, and simply rest in what we are. The Buddha called this original nature by many names. Sometimes he spoke of it as awareness itself, luminous and knowing. Sometimes he pointed to it as the unconditioned, that which does not depend on circumstances to be at peace. One of his most beautiful teachings describes it like this: in the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, there is only the heard. In the felt, there is only the felt. There is experiencing happening, vivid and alive. There is no one behind the experience who must be improved or defended. There is only the simple actuality of this moment, arising and passing, fresh and complete. Of course, hearing this does not immediately free us from the habit of self-improvement. The conditioning runs deep. The voice that evaluates and judges has been practicing for a very long time. But even a glimpse of this possibility can begin to loosen the grip. Even a moment of resting in simple awareness, without the need to be anyone in particular, can remind us that another way of being is possible. There is a teaching that compares our situation to that of someone searching desperately for their glasses, while the glasses are already sitting on their nose. We look everywhere for the peace we seek. We read about it, study it, develop elaborate plans to achieve it. And all the while, it is closer to us than our own breath. It is not somewhere else. It is not in the future. It is here, now, in the simple fact of being aware. This does not mean that growth is wrong, or that learning is unnecessary, or that we should never aspire to become more skillful or more kind. The path of awakening is not about becoming passive or indifferent to life. Rather, it is about discovering a place to stand that is not dependent on the endless project of self-improvement. A place from which we can grow and learn and change, but without the desperate grasping of one who believes they must earn the right to exist. As the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Perhaps the path of awakening is not about becoming an expert in being ourselves. Perhaps it is about returning to the beginner's mind, the mind that does not yet know it is supposed to be lacking, the mind that simply is, without apology, without striving, without the endless, exhausting dream of becoming somebody. The exhaustion begins to lift, the teachers tell us, not when we finally succeed at becoming who we think we should be, but when we recognize that we were never the problem in the first place. The one we have been trying to fix was never broken. The one we have been trying to complete was never incomplete. This is difficult to believe. The voice of not enough has been speaking for so long that its words seem like simple truth. But consider this: who is aware of that voice? Who notices the tiredness, the striving, the subtle sense of lack? That awareness, which is always present, which notices everything without itself being caught in the drama, is perhaps closer to what we truly are than all the stories we have been told about ourselves. So here is a gentle practice, not something to achieve, but something to notice. In the days and moments to come, when you catch the voice of self-improvement speaking, when you notice the familiar feeling of not quite enough, see if you can pause. Not to argue with the voice, not to silence it or push it away. Just to notice it with the same kindness you might offer a tired child who has been trying very hard for a very long time. Oh, there it is again. That old familiar feeling. And then, if you can, sense what is aware of that feeling. Not the content of the thought, but the simple fact that there is knowing happening. There is awareness. There is a space in which all of this arises: the voice, the tiredness, the striving, the hope. That space is not tired. That awareness is not lacking. It has never needed to become anything other than what it is. You might rest there, even for a moment. You might find that the peace you have been seeking has been waiting for you all along, patient and quiet, like the sky that remains blue and vast behind the passing clouds. As we close this first reflection, let us return to the image of that small child with their drawing, the one who poured themselves into their creation and, for a moment, knew it was complete. The sun in the corner, the purple leaves on the tree, the joy of making something and letting it be exactly what it is. That child is still within you, not as a memory to be sentimentalized, but as a living presence. The one who existed before the lessons of lack, the one who drew without concern for the lines, the one who knew, without needing to be taught, that they were already whole. Take a breath here, let the body soften, and when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. And yet, even within this dream of becoming, even while we are caught in the exhausting project of self-improvement, something in us remembers. There is a part of us that has never been fooled by the stories of lack. A part that remains untouched by all our striving, all our measuring of ourselves against some imagined standard. It is quiet, this part. It does not announce itself with fanfare or demand our attention. But it is there, like a spring of clear water, hidden beneath the dry surface of the earth. And sometimes, in unexpected moments, it rises up, and we catch a glimpse of something vast and free. The great teachers tell us that this freedom is not something we must earn or achieve. It is not waiting for us at the end of a long journey of self-improvement. It is not a reward for finally becoming good enough. It is what we are, beneath all the layers of conditioning and belief. And because it is what we are, it cannot be destroyed. It cannot be taken from us. It can only be forgotten, temporarily obscured, and even then, it keeps finding ways to remind us of itself. Like sunlight that finds its way through the smallest crack in a shuttered window. Like water that seeps through stone over centuries. Like a song that returns to us unbidden, years after we thought we had forgotten it. There is a story that speaks to this truth with particular tenderness. Let us imagine a time of great difficulty in a distant land. A time when certain ideas were considered dangerous, and those who held them could be taken from their homes and locked away. This has happened in many places throughout history, in many different forms. The details change, but the essential pattern remains the same. Those in power become afraid of those who think differently, and they try to silence them. In this time and place, there lived a man who was a teacher. He taught children in a small school, helping them learn to read and write, teaching them about the world and their place in it. He was a gentle man, thoughtful and kind, beloved by his students and respected by their parents. His classroom was a place of warmth and curiosity, where questions were welcomed and young minds were encouraged to unfold. But he also held certain ideas about how society might be organized more fairly, about how resources might be shared more equitably, about the dignity that every person deserves regardless of their circumstances. These ideas were not violent. They were not calls to harm anyone. They were simply visions of a more just world, spoken quietly to those who wished to listen. For this, he was arrested. For this, he was taken from his home one morning before dawn, taken from his wife who watched helplessly from the doorway, taken from his young daughter who was still sleeping in her small bed, dreaming, whatever dreams 5-year-old children dream. He was placed in a prison far from everyone who loved him. The conditions in this prison were harsh in ways both large and small. The prisoners were not allowed to speak without permission. They could not whistle or sing. They could not walk quickly or greet one another in the hallways. Small pleasures that most of us enjoy without thinking, a hummed tune, a friendly nod, a moment of spontaneous laughter, all of these were forbidden. Every small freedom that we take for granted was stripped away, leaving only the bare fact of existence within stone walls. And there were rules about what could be received from the outside world. These rules were detailed and strange, as if the authorities understood that hope itself was dangerous and must be carefully controlled. Drawings, for instance, were inspected with particular care. Images of certain things were forbidden. The prisoners could not receive drawings of couples embracing, for such images might remind them of love and connection, might feed the dangerous idea that they were not alone. They could not receive drawings of butterflies, for butterflies spoke of transformation, of the possibility of becoming something new and free. They could not receive drawings of stars, which might remind them of the vastness beyond their cells, the universe that continued to turn regardless of walls and guards. And they could not receive drawings of birds, for birds could fly, and flight was the very thing these walls were meant to prevent. The teacher endured these conditions as best he could. In the long hours of confinement, he found small ways to keep his spirit alive. He recited poems in his mind, verses he had memorized as a young man and never forgotten. He remembered the faces of his students, the way they looked when understanding dawned, the pride in their eyes when they mastered something difficult. He recalled the sound of his daughter's laughter, bright and sudden like bells, and the warmth of his wife's hand in his during their evening walks. He held on to these memories like precious stones hidden in his pocket, touching them in moments of despair to remind himself that beauty still existed somewhere in the world. Once a week, on Sundays, prisoners were allowed to receive visitors. These visits were brief and closely watched, but they were a lifeline, a thread connecting the men behind the walls to the world they had been torn from. The teacher's wife would come when she could, bringing what small comforts were permitted, her presence alone a kind of nourishment. And sometimes, when the journey was not too difficult, she would bring their daughter, who was only 5 years old and did not fully understand why her father lived in this cold, echoing place instead of at home where he belonged. One Sunday, the daughter came to visit carrying something special. She had made a drawing for her father. She had worked on it carefully, sitting at the kitchen table for a long time, her small tongue poking out in concentration as she chose her colors. It was a drawing of birds. Bright, colorful birds with wings spread wide, soaring across a blue sky. Red birds and yellow birds and birds of brilliant green. Some were flying high, almost touching the top of the page. Others swooped lower, as if just taking off or about to land. She was so proud of this drawing. She carried it carefully all the way to the prison, protecting it from wind and rain. She could not wait to see her father's face when he received it, could not wait to see his smile. But at the entrance to the prison, the guards took the drawing from her small hands. They looked at it, saw the birds, and tore it to pieces. Birds were forbidden. The child watched as her creation was destroyed, as the bright wings and blue sky became nothing but scraps on the cold floor. We can only imagine what this moment was like for her. The confusion, the sadness, perhaps anger too, though at 5 years old, she may not have had words for what she felt. What the story tells us is what happened next, in the days that followed. The next week, the daughter returned with another drawing. But this time, something was different. This time, she had thought carefully about what she was doing. The drawing was a picture of trees. Large, leafy trees with broad branches and thick foliage, their trunks sturdy, their canopies full and green. Trees were not forbidden. There was no rule against trees. Trees did not fly. Trees did not speak of freedom in the same obvious way that birds did. Trees simply stood, rooted and silent, and the authorities had not thought to fear them. The guards inspected the drawing with their usual thoroughness. They examined it from every angle, looking for hidden messages, forbidden images, anything that might feed the spirit of a man they were trying to break. But they saw only trees. Ordinary trees. They allowed it to pass. When the teacher received the drawing in the visiting room, He held it carefully, looking at every detail his daughter had created. He praised her work, told her how beautiful it was, how much it meant to him to have something she had made with her own hands. He studied the trunks she had drawn, the branches reaching upward, the leaves rendered with such care. And then he noticed something. Scattered throughout the branches of the trees, almost hidden among the leaves, were small circles of color. Dozens of them, tucked here and there among the green, easy to miss if you were not looking closely. Easy to overlook if you were a guard inspecting for contraband. He pointed to these circles and asked his daughter what they were. Were they oranges? Apples? What kind of fruit grew in these beautiful trees? The little girl looked around to make sure no one was listening. The guards had stepped back, satisfied that the drawing was harmless. Her mother sat nearby, watching with quiet attention. The child leaned close to her father, so close he could smell the familiar scent of her hair, the soap her mother used to wash it. She put a finger to her lips. "Shh," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you not see? They are eyes. They are the eyes of the birds I have smuggled in for you." The eyes of birds, hidden in the branches. Freedom, smuggled past the guards in a form they could not recognize. A 5-year-old child, understanding something profound about the nature of walls and the nature of flight, finding a way to give her father what the authorities had forbidden. This is what the teachers mean when they speak of our true nature. It cannot be imprisoned. It cannot be regulated or controlled. It finds ways to express itself even in the most confined circumstances, slipping through the smallest cracks, disguising itself when necessary, but never, ever disappearing entirely. The walls we build around ourselves, the walls that others build around us, the walls of our beliefs about who we are and what we are capable of, none of these walls can contain what we truly are. They can make us forget. They can make the forgetting last for years, for decades, for what feels like a lifetime. But the birds are always there, hidden in the trees, waiting to be recognized. There is a teaching attributed to the Buddha that speaks to this truth. He said that just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does this teaching have one taste, the taste of freedom. Not freedom as the opposite of imprisonment, though it includes that. Not freedom as getting what we want and avoiding what we fear, though it may bring a kind of ease with both. But a deeper freedom, the freedom of knowing what we are. The freedom of recognizing, even for a moment, the vast open awareness that has never been touched by any wall, any rule, any story of lack or limitation. This freedom does not depend on circumstances. It does not require that our outer situation change. The teacher in his cell, receiving a drawing of trees with hidden eyes, touched this freedom. His daughter, finding a way to smuggle birds past the guards, expressed this freedom. It was alive in both of them, connecting them across stone walls, more real than any barrier. There is another story that circles around this same truth, approaching it from a different direction. It is an ancient tale, found in various forms throughout the contemplative traditions of the East. It speaks to the strange way we search for what we already have. Once, long ago, in the high forests and misty valleys of a mountainous land, there lived a creature of extraordinary beauty. It was a deer, but not like other deer. Its coat was a soft brown, dappled with lighter spots that seemed to shimmer in certain lights. Its eyes were large and dark, filled with a kind of gentle intelligence. But its most remarkable quality was invisible to the eye. This deer carried within its own body a substance of incredible preciousness. From a gland near its navel, there emanated a fragrance so beautiful, so intoxicating, so utterly captivating that those who smelled it would stop whatever they were doing and simply stand in wonder. This fragrance was called musk, and it was considered one of the most valuable substances in the world. Merchants would travel great distances and pay enormous sums to obtain even a small amount. Poets wrote verses attempting to capture its beauty in words. Lovers gave it as gifts, believing it could express what language could not. Temples burned it as an offering to the divine, filling sacred spaces with its incomparable sweetness. But here is the strange and sorrowful heart of the story. The deer itself did not know that it carried this treasure. The fragrance emanated from its own body, but the deer could not locate its source. All it knew was that sometimes, when the wind was right, when the conditions aligned in just the right way, it would catch a whiff of something so beautiful that its heart would ache with longing. A sweetness beyond anything it had ever known. A perfume that seemed to promise everything the heart could desire. And so the deer began to search. It wandered through the forests of its home, following the scent whenever it arose, trying to find the source of this extraordinary beauty. When the fragrance seemed to come from the east, it traveled east. When it seemed to drift down from higher elevations, the deer climbed higher. It crossed streams where the water ran clear and cold. It passed through meadows where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. It rested in groves of ancient trees whose branches formed cathedral ceilings of green and gold. But no matter where it went, the source of the fragrance remained elusive. It was always somewhere else, always just out of reach, always leading the deer onward to the next valley, the next forest, the next distant ridge. The deer did not give up. How could it, when what it sought was so beautiful? It traveled across vast distances, through all the seasons, through years that blurred together into decades. It searched through spring rains and summer heat, through autumn mists and winter snows. It grew to know every corner of its mountain homeland, every hidden path, every secret glade. But the fragrance, though it came to the deer again and again, always seemed to be coming from somewhere it had not yet explored. The years passed. The deer grew old. Its legs, once strong and swift, became tired and slow. Its coat, once lustrous, grew dull and thin. Its eyes, once bright with hope, grew dim with exhaustion. It had spent its entire life searching for this beautiful fragrance, and it had never found it. And then, as the deer lay down for the last time, in a quiet clearing, as its breath grew shallow and its heartbeat slowed, something shifted. There was nowhere left to go. There was nothing left to search for. The lifelong quest was ending, and still the source had not been found. But in that final stillness, with no more running to do, no more seeking possible, the deer finally became quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. And in that profound quietness, it noticed something it had never noticed before. The fragrance was coming from itself. It had always been coming from itself. The treasure it had sought across mountains and through valleys, through forests and meadows, for its entire life, had been hidden within its own body all along. This is our situation, the teachers tell us with great compassion. We wander through the world searching for peace, for fulfillment, for the sense of finally coming home. We look for it in achievements and relationships, in possessions and experiences, in self-improvement and spiritual attainments. We catch glimpses of it sometimes, a scent on the wind, enough to keep us searching, enough to convince us that it must be out there somewhere, waiting to be found. But what if it is not out there? What if the fragrance we have been following, the peace we have been seeking, the freedom we long for, is arising from within us at every moment? What if we have been carrying the treasure all along, not recognizing it because we were so busy searching for it elsewhere? This is what the mystics of every tradition mean when they speak of the divine presence that radiates through all appearances. It is not far away. It is not hidden in a special place that only the worthy can access. It is here, now, in the simple fact of being aware. It is the awareness itself, looking out through your eyes at this very moment, listening through your ears, feeling through your body. The Zen tradition speaks of this as our original face, the face we had before our parents were born. Not a face in the literal sense, but the pure awareness that has never been born and will never die, that has no age, no history, no story of lack. It is what looks through the stories without being caught by them. It is what remains when all the searching stops. One ancient teacher put it with beautiful simplicity: what you are looking for is what is looking. We all have moments when the searching stops, when the walls become transparent, when we suddenly find ourselves at rest in a freedom we did not earn and cannot lose. These moments come unbidden. They cannot be manufactured through effort or technique, but they can be recognized when they come, and in recognizing them, we begin to trust that they point to something true about what we are. Perhaps such a moment happens for you in nature. You are walking somewhere, perhaps not even paying much attention, and suddenly, the beauty of light falling through leaves stops you in your tracks. Or the sound of moving water reaches something deep within you. Or you look up and see the stars, and for a moment the endless commentary of the mind falls silent, and you simply are here, present, without any sense of lacking anything at all. Perhaps it happens in love. You look into the eyes of someone dear to you, a child, a friend, a beloved, and the boundaries between self and other become thin and permeable. For a moment, you sense that you are not as separate as you thought, that the love you feel is not really yours, but something moving through you, something vast and impersonal that has chosen to express itself in this intimate form. Perhaps it happens in stillness. You are sitting quietly, not meditating in any formal way, just sitting, and the mind grows quiet for no particular reason. And in that quietness, you notice a peace that seems to have been there all along, a spaciousness that was simply obscured by all the noise. These moments are not special spiritual experiences reserved for the advanced or the fortunate. They are glimpses of what is always true, always present, always available. They are the eyes of birds hidden in the trees, the fragrance arising from within, the freedom that no wall can contain. The Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, used to remind his students that the present moment is a wonderful moment. Not because the present moment is always pleasant, but because it is always real. It is always here. And within it, if we are quiet enough to notice, the freedom we seek is already present. This very place, this very moment, this very breath. Not after you have improved yourself sufficiently. Not when you have finally solved all your problems or achieved all your goals. Not at the end of a long search in some distant valley you have not yet explored. Now, here, already. The little girl visiting her father in prison knew something important. She knew, with the intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possess, that the rules about birds applied to a certain kind of bird. the kind that could be seen and recognized and controlled, the kind that the guards knew how to identify and destroy. But there is another kind of bird, the kind that hides in the trees, the kind that lives in the imagination, in the heart, in the connection between those who love each other, the kind that cannot be stopped because it exists in a dimension that walls cannot reach. We too have this knowledge buried somewhere within us. We know, even when we have forgotten that we know, that the freedom we seek is not the kind that depends on external circumstances. It is not the freedom of getting what we want and avoiding what we fear. It is a more fundamental freedom, the freedom of recognizing what we are beneath all the stories. And what we are, beneath all the stories of lack and becoming, is awareness itself. Open, clear, luminous awareness that has never been imprisoned by anything, that has never been improved or diminished by any circumstance, that simply is what it is, vast and free, like the sky that holds all the clouds without being touched by any of them. The deer finally found the source of the fragrance by becoming still. The teacher found freedom in a prison cell through a child's drawing. We too can find what we are looking for, not by searching more frantically, not by improving ourselves more thoroughly, but by becoming quiet enough to notice what has been here all along. There is a Zen saying, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Not through our effort, not through our striving, through our willingness to stop, to be still, to trust that what we seek is already present and does not need us to chase it. The birds are already in the trees. The fragrance is already arising. The freedom is already here. We have only to recognize it. Let us pause for a moment now. Take a slow, relaxing breath. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else that keeps us from recognizing the freedom that is already here. It is not only the exhausting project of self-improvement, though that plays its part. It is not only the walls we have built or the searching we have done in the wrong direction. There is something more subtle at work, something so close to us that we rarely notice it at all. It is our certainty, our sense that we know how things are. We move through our days with a peculiar confidence. We wake in the morning and we know, more or less, who we are. We know what kind of person we have been and what kind of person we are likely to be today. We know what needs to be done, what problems must be solved, what goals must be pursued. We know who the people in our lives are, what they are like, what we can expect from them. We know, in a general way, how the world works and what our place in it is. This knowing feels solid. It feels reliable. It is the ground we stand on as we navigate our lives. But is it? There is an old story that invites us to look more closely at the foundations of our certainty. It is a story about a scientist and an elderly woman, and it has been told in many forms over the years. Let us explore one version of it together. Let us travel back in time to an evening in a great city known for its learning. The streets outside are busy with carriages and pedestrians, with the ordinary bustle of urban life. But inside a grand lecture hall, an audience has gathered in hushed anticipation. The gaslights flicker against wood-paneled walls. Learned men and curious citizens sit in rows of polished seats, notebooks open, minds ready to receive. At the front of the hall, a distinguished scholar prepares to speak. He is a man of considerable reputation, respected by his peers, celebrated for his contributions to human knowledge. His hair is silver, his bearing dignified. He has spent decades studying the heavens, measuring and calculating, building a picture of the cosmos based on careful observation and rigorous thought. Tonight, he will share what he has learned. Tonight, he will explain how the universe is structured. He was a man of considerable reputation, respected by his peers, celebrated for his contributions to human knowledge. The lecture hall was filled with educated people who had come to hear him explain the latest understanding of how the cosmos was structured. The scholar spoke eloquently about the earth and its place in the heavens. He described how our planet orbits around the sun, held in place by invisible forces that can be measured and predicted. He explained how the sun itself is just one star among billions, how it moves through an immense collection of stars that we call our galaxy. He painted a picture of vast distances and enormous scales, of a universe far larger and more complex than our ancestors could have imagined. It was an impressive lecture. The audience listened with attention and respect. When the scholar finished, there was appreciative applause. But then, from the back of the room, an elderly woman rose to her feet. She was small and simply dressed, not the sort of person one would expect to challenge a distinguished scientist. But her voice was clear and confident. "What you have told us," she said, "is all very interesting, but I am afraid it is quite mistaken. The world is not as you describe it at all." The scholar raised an eyebrow. He was accustomed to questions, but not to being told he was wrong by someone who clearly had no scientific training. Still, he was a courteous man, so he asked her politely to explain what she meant. "The world," the woman said, "is actually a flat plate, and it rests on the back of a giant tortoise." There was a ripple of amusement through the audience. The scholar smiled, the indulgent smile of one who knows better but does not wish to be unkind. "That is a colorful image," he said. "But tell me, if the world rests on a tortoise, what does the tortoise stand on?" The woman was not flustered. She looked at the scholar with bright, knowing eyes. "You are very clever, young man," she said. "Very clever indeed. But it is tortoises all the way down." Now, on the surface, this story seems to be about the difference between scientific knowledge and folk belief. The scholar knows how things really are. The woman is clinging to an old myth. We are meant to smile at her stubbornness and admire his learning. But there is another way to hear this story. A way that does not dismiss the woman quite so easily. After all, what does the scholar's universe rest on? He can explain that the earth orbits the sun, but what holds the sun in place is he can describe the forces of gravity. But what is gravity, really? Where did it come from? He can trace the origins of the cosmos back to a single moment of unimaginable expansion. But what existed before that moment? What is the universe expanding into? At some point, every explanation reaches its limit. At some point, every chain of reasoning encounters something it cannot explain, a mystery it cannot penetrate. At some point, even the most sophisticated understanding must rest on something it simply accepts without fully comprehending. Perhaps it is tortoises all the way down after all. Perhaps the woman, in her own way, was pointing to something true. Not about the literal structure of the cosmos, but about the nature of human knowledge itself. We do not know what this universe came out of. We do not know where it is going. We do not even know, with any real certainty, what will happen tomorrow. We move through our lives as if we understand how things work, as if our maps of reality are accurate and complete. But beneath all our knowing, there is a mystery so vast that the mind cannot contain it. The Zen tradition has a way of pointing to this. A student once asked a master, "What is the fundamental principle of Buddhism?" The master replied, "Vast emptiness, nothing holy." The student, confused, asked, "Then who is standing before me?" The master said, "I do not know. I do not know." These may be among the most honest words a human being can speak. And yet, we live as if we do know. We move through our days with an air of quiet certainty, rarely pausing to notice how much of what we think we know is actually assumption, habit, inherited belief. We carry around a version of reality that we assembled long ago and have rarely questioned since. There is a kind of screen between us and the living world. An invisible screen, always running, always projecting images and stories and interpretations. This screen is so seamless, so constant, that we do not notice it is there. It has been running for so long that we have forgotten there is anything behind it. This screen tells us who we are. It tells us our history, our personality, our strengths and weaknesses. It reminds us of what we have done and what has been done to us. It projects a continuous story of a self moving through time, and we believe this story without question. The screen tells us who the people around us are. Our family, our friends, our colleagues, the strangers we pass on the street. Before we have truly encountered them, the screen has already produced a version of them, a set of expectations and assumptions that we then interact with as if it were the person themselves. The screen tells us what is happening, what it means, what we should do about it. It narrates our experience so continuously that we forget it is narrating. We mistake its projections for reality itself. We live in the movie it is showing us and forget that there is a world outside the theater. You might notice this screen if you pay attention. Notice how, when you meet someone, you immediately begin to form impressions. Before they have said more than a few words, you are already deciding what kind of person they are, whether you like them, whether they can be trusted. The screen is working, sorting, and categorizing, creating a version of this person that you will then interact with as if it were the person themselves. Notice how, when you wake in the morning, there is often a moment of simple awareness before the screen turns on. A moment of just being here, present, without any story. And then the thoughts begin. The concerns of the day arise. The sense of who you are and what you must do reassembles itself. The screen flickers to life, and suddenly you are living in its projections again. This is not a failing. It is simply how the human mind works. We are meaning-making creatures. We cannot help but interpret, categorize, understand. The screen evolved because it helped our ancestors survive. It allowed them to quickly assess situations, recognize patterns, predict what might happen next. It was a useful tool, but a tool can become a prison when we forget that it is a tool. When we mistake the map for the territory, we lose touch with the territory itself. When we believe the screen's projections are reality, we lose access to the living, breathing, ever-changing actuality of this moment. There is a beautiful passage from a contemplative writer who explored this territory deeply. He wrote about how we take the wild, boundless presence of the divine and reduce it to small images we can manage. We stake it down, he said, like a tent in a storm. We try to control it, to make it predictable, to fit it into categories we can understand. We domesticate what is by nature untamable. He asked a question that has stayed with many who have encountered it. What have we done with that wildness? What have we done with that naturalness of being? It is a question worth sitting with, not to produce an immediate answer necessarily, but to feel its weight, to let it open something in us, to notice how much of our lives is spent managing, controlling, explaining, defending our version of how things are, to sense how much energy goes into maintaining the screen, keeping the projections running, believing we know what we are looking at. What have we done with that wildness? We have explained it, categorized it, turned it into something familiar and manageable. We have traded the vast, mysterious actuality of being alive for a set of ideas about being alive. We have exchanged the territory for the map and then forgotten that the territory exists at all. Watch a young child before they have learned to manage their experience. There is a naturalness to them, an unself-conscious presence. They cry when they are sad. They laugh when something delights them. They are fascinated by the simplest things, a bug on the sidewalk, the way light falls through a window, the feeling of grass under bare feet. They have not yet learned to overlay their experience with a screen of interpretation. They have not yet staked down their wildness. Something happens as we grow. We learn to be appropriate. We learn to control our expressions, moderate our emotions, fit into the expectations of those around us. We develop what might be called a social self, a version of us that knows how to navigate the world of other people. This is necessary. This is part of becoming a functioning adult. But something can be lost in the process. The wildness gets tamed. The naturalness gets covered over. We become so identified with our managed, appropriate self that we forget there is anything else. We forget the vast, unconditioned awareness that we were before we learned to be somebody. The Buddhist teachings point to this forgotten dimension. They call it by various names: Buddha nature, original mind, the unconditioned. It is not something we need to create or achieve. It is what we already are, beneath the layers of conditioning. It is the sky behind the clouds, the ocean beneath the waves, the silence out of which all sounds arise. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from maintaining our certainties. It takes energy to keep the screen running, to keep defending our version of how things are. We may not notice this energy expenditure because it is so constant, so habitual. But it is there, a subtle tension, a continuous effort to hold our world together. What would happen if we let our certainty soften just a little? Not abandon all knowledge, not pretend we do not know anything at all, but simply loosen our grip on our convictions. Allow a little more space around our conclusions. Become willing to say with the old Zen master, "I do not know." There is a story about a scholar who traveled a great distance to study with a renowned teacher. The journey took many days, across rivers and through mountain passes, and with each mile the scholar's anticipation grew. He had read everything the teacher had written. He had studied the commentaries and the commentaries on the commentaries. He arrived feeling prepared, even confident. When he finally reached the small, simple dwelling where the teacher lived, he was eager to begin. He began immediately to demonstrate his knowledge, speaking at length about what he had learned, the books he had read, the insights he had gained. He quoted texts from memory. He explained subtle points of philosophy. He was eager to show that he was a worthy student, that the teacher's time would not be wasted on him. The teacher listened patiently, sitting very still, his face calm and unreadable. When at last the scholar paused for breath, the teacher suggested they have tea together before beginning their work. The teacher began to pour tea into the scholar's cup. The cup filled, but the teacher kept pouring. The tea overflowed, spilling across the table, dripping onto the floor. Still the teacher poured. "Stop," the scholar said. "The cup is full. No more will go in." The teacher set down the teapot and looked at his visitor with gentle eyes. "You are like this cup," he said. "How can I teach you anything when you are already so full of your own knowing? First, empty your cup. This is not an instruction to become ignorant or to distrust everything we have learned. It is an invitation to hold our knowledge more lightly, to make room for what we do not yet understand, to be willing to encounter each moment fresh, without immediately filtering it through what we already believe." The Buddha spoke of this quality when he described what he called beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, he said, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The beginner approaches each situation with openness and curiosity, not knowing what will happen, not assuming they already understand. The expert, trapped by their expertise, sees only what they expect to see. What would it be like to move through a single day with a little more beginner's mind? To encounter the familiar people and places and activities of your life as if you were meeting them for the first time. Your morning cup of tea or coffee, the face of someone you love, the street you walk down every day, the sensation of water on your skin, the sound of wind in trees or traffic in streets. All of it fresh, all of it new, all of it mysterious. Because it is mysterious, we have simply stopped noticing. The universe that the scientist described in his lecture, the one with billions of galaxies and unimaginable distances, is strange beyond comprehension. But so is the universe we encounter when we pick up a cup, when we take a breath, when we look into another person's eyes. The mystery is not out there, in distant space. The mystery is right here, in the most ordinary moments of our lives. A single leaf falling from a tree. What is it, really? We have words for it, explanations, scientific descriptions of chlorophyll and cellular structure and the mechanics of wind. But do any of these words touch the actuality of that leaf, turning in the air, catching the light, settling gently on the ground? Do they capture what it is to see it, to be present as it falls? Zen master after Zen master has pointed to this ordinary mystery. What is Buddha? A student asks. 3 pounds of flax, the master replies. Not a theological answer, not a philosophical explanation, just the vivid, immediate presence of something right here, something real, something that cannot be captured by any concept. When we let our certainty soften, something else becomes possible. The wildness begins to breathe again. The naturalness we lost touch with starts to stir. We find ourselves more present, more alive, more connected to the actual texture of our experience rather than our ideas about our experience. This does not mean we become passive or confused. We can still function. We can still make decisions, solve problems, navigate the practical demands of life. But we hold it all more lightly. We stop pretending we have it all figured out. We allow ourselves to rest in the mystery that was always here, beneath all our knowing. The elderly woman in the story may have been onto something after all. Not because the world is literally held up by tortoises, but because, at some point, Every explanation gives way to something that cannot be explained. At some point, we reach the ground that has no ground beneath it. And rather than being frightening, this can be liberating. We can stop pretending. We can stop defending our small version of how things are. We can relax into not knowing and discover that not knowing is not emptiness, but fullness. It is not confusion, but wonder. As one teacher put it, the goal is not to figure out the mystery. The goal is to be fully present within it. Perhaps this is what the contemplative traditions have been pointing to all along. Not a different set of beliefs to replace our current ones. Not a better map of reality to substitute for the one we have. Not more sophisticated tortoises holding up more sophisticated tortoises. But an invitation to set down our maps altogether, at least from time to time, and encounter the territory directly. The trees outside your window, with their particular green and their particular way of moving in the breeze. The breath moving in and out of your body. This breath, the only one that exists right now. The weight of your hands resting in your lap. The subtle aliveness in your fingers and palms. The sounds arising and passing away, near and far, none of them repeating, each one utterly unique. All of it, just as it is, without needing to be explained or understood or fitted into some framework of meaning. This is not emptiness. This is not the absence of something. This is fullness. This is aliveness. This is the wild, natural presence that was always here, waiting for us to stop knowing long enough to notice it. Waiting for us to set down our certainties, even for a moment, and simply be present with what is. The Buddha described his own awakening in surprisingly simple terms. He said he discovered nothing new. He simply woke up to what had always been true. The ground he found was not something added to reality, but something that was always present, hidden in plain sight, overlooked because everyone was looking for something more complicated. Tortoises all the way down, mystery all the way through. And in the heart of that mystery, a freedom that no knowledge can capture and no ignorance can destroy. We do not know what we are. We do not know what this universe is. We do not know what will happen tomorrow or even in the next moment. And that not knowing, held gently, becomes a doorway into something vast and alive and utterly present. Let us pause for a moment now. Take a slow, gentle breath. And when you are ready, we will continue together. So here we are, in the midst of this great mystery. We have seen how our certainties rest on foundations we cannot fully explain. We have sensed, perhaps, that the wildness we have tamed still breathes somewhere beneath our managed lives. And we have glimpsed, through stories and through stillness, a freedom that does not depend on circumstances. But there is still a question that wants to be explored. If this freedom is what we truly are, if this vast awareness has always been present, how did we come to feel so separate? How did we come to experience ourselves as small, isolated beings in a world that seems so large and uncertain? The ancient teachers had a beautiful way of speaking about this. They compared our situation to that of water and waves. Imagine, for a moment, an ocean. A great, vast ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. Perhaps you have seen such an ocean, or perhaps you have only imagined it. Either way, let the image settle in your mind. The water is deep and still, extending down into blue darkness, rising up to meet the light of the sun. On a calm day, the surface is like glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it becomes hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The water has been here for longer than memory. It was here before there were creatures to remember anything. It will be here long after. It simply is, boundless and alive, holding within itself everything that swims and floats and drifts. Now, in this ocean, something begins to happen. Perhaps a wind comes from a distant shore, carrying the warmth of land. Perhaps there is a tremor in the earth far below. The stillness is disturbed. Movement arises. Energy that was resting begins to stir. And where before there was only undifferentiated water, smooth and even, now something new appears. A wave. It rises from the surface, gathering itself, taking shape. Water that was flat begins to mound and lift. It draws more water into itself. It grows. It has a beginning and it will have an end. It has a front edge that catches the light and a back edge that slopes down into shadow. It has a crest that sometimes curls and sometimes simply rolls. For a moment, for many moments, it is distinct. It is something recognizable, something we can point to and name. There, we might say, there is a wave. And we would be right. There is a wave. It is real. It has its own particular height, its own particular speed, its own particular journey across the water. It is not imaginary. It is not an illusion. If you were swimming and it came toward you, you would feel its power. It would lift you and carry you and set you down again. It is real. But here is the thing about waves. They are made entirely of water. They have never been anything but water. At no point did the wave become something other than the ocean from which it arose. It is ocean, moving in a particular way. It is water, taking a temporary form. The wave might not know this. If a wave could think, it might look around at all the other waves and see only difference. That wave over there is taller. That one is faster. That one has a more beautiful curl. The wave might feel proud of its own height or ashamed of its own smallness. It might compete with other waves or fear being overwhelmed by them. It might spend its entire brief existence comparing itself, measuring itself, trying to become a better wave. And all the while, it would be missing the most essential truth about itself. It is not separate. It has never been separate. It is water through and through, and all the other waves are also water, and together they are all one ocean, rising and falling, gathering and dissolving, endlessly. This is what the teachers are pointing to when they speak of our true nature. We are like waves who have forgotten we are water. We experience ourselves as separate, as bounded, as distinct from everything around us. We compare ourselves to other waves. We try to become better waves. We fear the moment when we will dissolve back into the sea. But we have never stopped being ocean. Not for a single moment. The sense of separation is real as an experience, but it is not the deepest truth about what we are. One ancient teacher put it this way: form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. The wave is ocean, and the ocean is wave. They are not two different things. The temporary shape and the boundless source are one and the same. Another teacher used different words but pointed to the same truth. All beings are Buddha nature, he said. Just as ice is water in a different form, what we are is never separate from the vast awareness that holds everything. We are already what we are seeking. We have always been what we are seeking, But knowing this with the mind is not the same as knowing it with the whole being. Hearing these words is not the same as tasting this truth in our own direct experience. So let us go deeper into this exploration, gently, with curiosity rather than effort. Let us go back a very long way. Not to the beginning, because we do not know where the beginning is, or if there even was one. But let us go back to a time before there were creatures like us, before there were beings that thought and worried and made plans. Let us go back to when life itself was just beginning to stir. Imagine a world very different from the one we know. The continents had different shapes then, or perhaps there were no continents at all, just a vast ocean beneath a sky that was not yet blue. The sun rose and set, as it always has, but nothing watched it. The stars came out at night, but nothing named them or made up stories about them. It was a quiet world, a patient world, a world waiting. In the warm, shallow waters of this ancient time, something remarkable was happening. Something that had never happened before in all the long ages since the earth formed from dust and fire. Tiny specks of matter, so small they could not be seen with any eye, were beginning to organize themselves in new ways. They were gathering together, forming delicate structures, creating something that had never existed before in all the universe. At least, not on this small blue world. These were among the first living things. Not plants or animals as we know them. Not fish or trees or anything with a name we would recognize. Something far simpler. Something more like a whisper of life than a shout. Little more than bundles of intricate substances wrapped in a thin, delicate membrane, floating in the primordial sea like tiny soap bubbles, drifting on warm currents. And yet, in their very simplicity, something profound was taking place. Something that would echo down through billions of years, through every living thing that would ever exist, including you. These tiny beings were drawing a line. They were creating a boundary between inside and outside. They were saying, in a way that did not use words, "This is me, and that is not me. This is what I am made of, and that is the world around me." For the first time in the history of this planet, there was a sense, however faint, of self and other. This was not a mistake. This was not a fall from grace. This was life learning to take form. This was existence discovering a new way to experience itself. Inside the membrane, the little being could maintain conditions that suited its needs. It could gather what nourished it and protect itself from what threatened it. The boundary made survival possible. The boundary was a kind of gift, but the boundary was also the beginning of something else. It was the first faint stirring of what would eventually become, in creatures far more complex, the feeling of being separate. The sense that there is me in here and everything else out there. The seeds of loneliness, of fear, of longing for connection. Those ancient, simple beings did not feel these things as we do. They did not have minds that could reflect on their situation or hearts that could ache with loneliness. But something was set in motion in those warm, ancient waters. A pattern was established that would ripple forward through billions of years, through countless forms, until it arrived at us. We are the inheritors of that ancient boundary. We are waves who have become very good at waving. As life grew more complex, so did the sense of being separate. Creatures developed more sophisticated ways of perceiving and responding to their world. They developed nervous systems that could process information, brains that could learn and remember, minds that could think and plan and imagine. And with all of this came a more elaborate sense of self. Not just a boundary between inside and outside, but a whole identity. A story about who we are. A feeling of being someone in particular, with a history and a personality and a set of concerns. This is sometimes called the ego, though that word has accumulated so many meanings that it can be confusing. Let us simply call it the sense of being a separate self. The wave, looking around at all the other waves, believing itself to be fundamentally distinct. This sense of separate self is not evil or wrong. Like the membrane around those ancient single-celled beings, it serves a purpose. It allows us to function in the world. It allows us to take care of ourselves and the ones we love. It gives us a stable sense of identity from which to operate. But there is a cost. The more strongly we identify with the separate self, the more we feel isolated. The more we believe in our distinctness, the more vulnerable we feel. After all, if I am truly separate from everything else, then I am alone in a vast universe. I must defend my boundaries. I must compete for resources. I must fear what might threaten my existence. This is where the freedom we explored earlier starts to seem distant, unreachable. How can we feel boundless when we experience ourselves as so bounded? How can we sense the ocean when all we can see is the wave? There is a way that many of us were raised that deepens this sense of separation. It happens gradually, so gradually that we do not notice it happening. When we are very young, we do not have a strong sense of being a separate self. We are more like pure experiencing, awareness without a center. We do not know where we end and the world begins. We are merged with our surroundings, our caregivers, the sensations flowing through us. Then, slowly, we begin to be mirrored. The people around us, the ones who care for us, reflect back to us who we are. They give us a name. They respond to us as someone. They have expectations, hopes, fears. They see us in particular ways, and we begin to see ourselves through their eyes. This is natural. This is how human beings come to know themselves. We need to be mirrored. We need to develop a sense of self in order to grow and function. But along with the mirroring often comes something else. Messages, sometimes spoken and sometimes not, about who we should be, about what is acceptable and what is not, about how we need to change in order to be loved. Perhaps we learned that certain feelings were not okay, that anger should be hidden or sadness pushed away. Perhaps we learned that we were only valuable when we achieved things, when we performed well, when we made others proud. Perhaps we learned, in 1,000 small ways, that who we naturally were was not quite enough, that we needed to become someone else, someone better, in order to be worthy of love and belonging. And so, on top of the natural sense of being a separate self, we layered a whole project of self-improvement. We began to try to shape our wave into a more acceptable form. We added to the separation a sense of inadequacy, a feeling that even this limited self we took ourselves to be was not good enough. The membrane that once simply defined us now became a kind of cage. The boundary that allowed us to function became a prison we could not see. But here is the good news, the news that the teachers have been whispering across the centuries. The prison is not as solid as it seems. The boundary is more permeable than we know. And the ocean we forgot, the vast awareness that is our true nature, has been here all along, patiently waiting. We can see this in certain moments, if we are attentive. moments when the sense of separate self grows thin and something vaster shines through. Have you ever been so absorbed in something that you forgot yourself entirely? Perhaps you were listening to music, and there was just the music, without a listener. Perhaps you were watching a sunset, and for a moment the one watching dissolved into the colors. Perhaps you were in conversation with someone, and the boundary between you seemed to disappear, and there was just this intimacy, this meeting, without two separate selves involved. These moments are more common than we realize. They happen when we are not trying, when we are not efforting to be someone in particular. They slip in through the cracks of our busyness, our striving, our endless self-management. And in those moments, we taste what the teachers have been pointing to. The wave remembers it is water. Such moments are not something we achieve. They are what happens naturally when we stop clutching so tightly to the sense of being separate. They are grace, appearing when we least expect it, reminding us of what we have always been. The Zen tradition speaks of this with characteristic directness. A student asked a master, "What is the way?" The master replied, "Ordinary mind is the way." The student was confused. Should I try to direct myself toward it? If you try to direct yourself, the master said, you turn away from it. But if I do not try, how will I know the way? The master answered, the way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is confusion. When you have really reached the true way beyond doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as outer space. How can this be discussed at the level of right and wrong? This can sound puzzling at first, but it is pointing to something simple. The ocean is not something the wave achieves by effort. The wave is already ocean. Any effort to become ocean is based on the false belief that the wave is not already ocean. The trying itself reinforces the illusion of separation. So what is the wave to do? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps simply relax. Perhaps simply notice what is already true. There is a tendency in spiritual seeking to make awakening into another project, another thing to achieve, another way to become a better wave. We read books about enlightenment and try to practice our way toward it. We measure our progress. We compare ourselves to others. We wonder why we have not yet arrived. But the teachers gently remind us that there is nowhere to arrive. We are already home. We have never left home. The sense of being far from home is itself a kind of dream, a forgetting so deep that it feels like reality. One beloved teacher used to ask his students a simple question: who is aware of this moment? Not what are you aware of? Not what are you thinking or feeling? But who is aware? What is this awareness itself? When we turn attention in this direction, something interesting happens. We look for the one who is aware, and we cannot find them. We look for the center of awareness, the self who is having all these experiences, and there is nothing solid there. There is just awareness, open and clear, containing everything without being touched by anything. This is what the teachers mean by emptiness. Not a void, not a blank nothing, but an absence of the solid, separate self we thought we were. The wave looks for its essential waveness and finds only water. And yet, this emptiness is not cold or dead. It is alive. It knows. It is aware. There is a radiance to it, a quality of wakefulness that perceives everything without grasping anything. The teachers sometimes call this luminosity, the knowing quality of awareness itself. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. The wave is water, and the water waves. They are not two. Perhaps you have had a glimpse of this in your own experience. A moment when the boundaries softened, when the sense of being separate faded into the background, and what remained was simply this. Simply here, simply aware, simply at rest. It may have happened in nature, surrounded by beauty that temporarily dissolved the one who was looking. Perhaps you were walking in a forest, and the quality of light through the leaves was so perfect that something in you went quiet. Perhaps you were standing at the edge of the sea, watching waves roll in, and for a moment you could not tell where you ended and the world began. Perhaps it was something as simple as watching snow fall in the stillness of a winter evening, each flake drifting down in silence, and suddenly there was no one watching, just the watching itself. It may have happened in love, when the heart opened so completely that there was no longer a clear line between self and other. Holding a newborn child, perhaps, or looking into the eyes of someone who has loved you for many years, or even a moment with a stranger, an unexpected connection, a glance across a crowded room that somehow held more intimacy than words could express. It may have happened in stillness, in silence, in moments of unexpected peace, waking in the middle of the night to a quiet so complete that it felt like a presence, sitting alone at the end of a long day, too tired to think, and finding that the tiredness had cleared a space for something gentle to enter. Or perhaps in the midst of ordinary activity, washing dishes or walking down a familiar street, when suddenly the ordinary became extraordinary and everything was simply itself, luminous and complete. These glimpses are not special spiritual achievements. They are simply moments when the natural state shines through, when the cloud cover parts and the sun that was always there becomes visible again. The invitation of the contemplative path is not to create these moments through effort, but to notice them when they come, to recognize them, to trust them, and to allow, gradually, gently, the sense of being a solid, separate self to relax. Not to destroy the self, but to hold it more lightly, to see it for what it is, a useful pattern, a temporary form, a wave that has never stopped being ocean. When the wave remembers it is water, something shifts. Not in the outer circumstances of life, but in the felt sense of what we are. The fear that comes from feeling separate begins to soften. The loneliness that aches at the heart begins to ease. Not because we have found something new, but because we have recognized something that was always here. We still function as individuals. We still have names and histories and personalities. The wave does not disappear when it remembers the ocean. It continues to rise and fall, to move across the water, to have its brief and beautiful existence. But it no longer feels isolated. It no longer fears its own dissolution. It knows that what it truly is cannot be destroyed, because what it truly is was never born. This is the peace that passes understanding. Not a peace that depends on things going well, but a peace that abides even in difficulty. Not a peace we manufacture, but a peace we discover, hidden in the depths of what we are. An ancient verse puts it beautifully. Like waves on the ocean, like clouds in the sky, all appearances arise and dissolve in the vastness of awareness. We are that vastness. We have always been that vastness. The wave remembering the ocean is simply awareness recognizing itself. So as you rest here, listening, breathing, simply being, know that what you are cannot be lost. The wave may rise and fall. The form may change. The story of who you are may shift and transform over the years. But the ocean remains. The awareness in which everything appears remains. The water of which all waves are made remains. This is not something you need to believe. It is not a philosophy to adopt or a doctrine to accept on faith. It is something you can sense if you grow quiet enough. It is something you can taste in moments when the busy mind takes a rest. It is here now, in this very moment, as close as your own breath, as intimate as the awareness reading these words. You are not as small as you have been taught. You are not as separate as you feel. You are not the bounded, isolated self that fear has made you believe you are. These teachings are not meant to make you feel bad about your humanness, about your struggles, about the very real challenges of living as a wave in a world of waves. They are meant to remind you of something you already know, deep down, in the place beneath words. You are water pretending to be a wave. You are sky pretending to be a cloud. You are awareness itself, temporarily taking this shape, living this life, hearing these words. And even this temporary shape is precious. Even this brief form is beautiful. The wave does not need to deny itself in order to remember the ocean. It does not need to stop being a wave or pretend that waves do not matter. It simply needs to relax its grip on the illusion of separation and recognize what has been true all along. The ocean is here. It has always been here. It was here before you were born into this form. It will be here when this form releases back into the vastness. And you, whatever shape you are taking in this moment, whatever name you carry, whatever story you tell about yourself, are nothing other than that. Rest in this, if you can. Not as something to achieve, but as something to settle into. Like sinking into warm water. Like relaxing into the arms of someone who has always loved you. Like coming home after a long, long journey and finding that home was never somewhere else. Let us pause for a moment now, and when you are ready, we will continue together. We have been exploring the nature of what we are, the ocean that takes the form of waves, the awareness that temporarily wears the costume of a separate self, and we have begun to sense, perhaps, that this vastness is not far away, not something to be achieved, but something already here, waiting to be recognized. But if this is true, why do we spend so much of our lives feeling disconnected from it? Why, if the ocean is always present, do we spend our days feeling like isolated waves, tossed about by circumstances, lost in worry and regret? There is something worth understanding about the nature of our minds, something that explains, with great gentleness, why we wander so far from home, even though home is always right here. The mind is sticky. What do we mean by this? Simply that awareness has a natural tendency to attach itself to whatever arises. A thought appears, and awareness gloms onto it, follows it, gets absorbed in it. An emotion arises, and we become that emotion, identified with it, lost in its story. A sound occurs, and we reach out to grasp it, to name it, to fit it into our understanding. This stickiness is not a flaw. It is simply how minds work. It is part of what allowed our ancestors to survive, to focus on what mattered, to learn and remember and plan. The ability of awareness to attach to objects and follow them is a remarkable capacity. But it has a shadow side. When awareness sticks to thoughts, we forget that we are awareness. We become the thought instead. When awareness sticks to emotions, we become the emotion. When awareness sticks to the story of who we are, we become that story, and the vast open space in which the story appears is forgotten entirely. One teacher described it this way. He said that the thinking mind is always latching onto something. It reaches out through the senses to catch hold of a particular sight or sound. Or it conjures up a memory from the past, something that happened years ago, and suddenly we are living in that memory as if it were happening now. Or it imagines something in the future, a conversation we might have, a problem that might arise, and we find ourselves reacting to this imagined future as if it were real. The mind is always busy, he said, always taking hold of something, always reaching out and grasping. And so we live, much of the time, in a kind of dream. Not the dream of sleep, but a waking dream. A dream made of thoughts. Have you ever had the experience of suddenly coming to and realizing you have been completely lost in thought? It is a curious feeling. One moment, you are somewhere else entirely, absorbed in a mental world, and then suddenly you are back here, in your body, in this room, in this moment. Perhaps you were driving somewhere familiar, a route you have taken many times, and you arrived at your destination with little memory of the journey. Your body was steering the car, stopping at red lights, navigating turns, but you were somewhere else entirely. You were in your thoughts, living in a mental world, replaying a conversation or planning for the future, while the real world passed by your windows unnoticed. Or perhaps you were in conversation with someone. They were speaking, and you were nodding at the right moments, making appropriate sounds of agreement or interest, but actually, you were not there at all. Part of you was thinking about something else, planning what you would say next, replaying something that happened earlier in the day, worrying about something yet to come. The person in front of you was sharing something, perhaps something important to them, but you were in the movie of your own mind. Or perhaps you were eating a meal, and suddenly you looked down and the plate was empty, but you could not remember tasting any of it. Your hand had lifted the fork, your mouth had chewed, your throat had swallowed, but you had been absent for the whole experience. Lost in thought, missing your own life. This is so common that we hardly notice it. It is the water we swim in. We assume this is just how life is. This constant drifting away into thought. This living in our heads while our bodies move through the world on autopilot. But there is another way to be. Moments when we are simply here, fully present, not lost in the mental commentary. Moments when the stickiness releases and we find ourselves in direct contact with life as it is actually happening. These moments feel different. They feel more vivid, more alive, more real. The teachers point to this difference again and again. They invite us to notice the contrast between being lost in thought and being present. Not to judge the lost moments, but simply to recognize them for what they are. A kind of trance, a kind of sleep, a kind of forgetting. There is an image that can help us understand what happens when awareness gets sticky. Imagine that you are sitting in a movie theater. The lights have gone down. The room is dark except for the glow from the screen. You have settled into your seat, your attention drawn forward to the bright rectangle where a story is about to unfold. And then the movie begins. Characters appear. They have faces and voices and personalities. They live in a world that looks real, sounds real, feels real. There are situations, conflicts, moments of tension and release. There is music that swells at the right moments, guiding your emotions. The story is compelling. It draws you in. As you watch, something happens. You forget where you are. You forget that you are sitting in a seat, in a dark room, watching light projected onto a flat surface. You forget that you could stand up and walk out at any moment. You become so absorbed in the story that you feel as if you are inside it. When the characters are in danger, your muscles tense. When something scary happens, your heart races. When something sad happens, tears come to your eyes. When something beautiful happens, your breath catches. The story has become your reality. The movie has swallowed you whole. This is what happens with thoughts. The mind projects a continuous movie onto the screen of awareness, and we watch it so intently that we forget we are watching. We become lost in the story. We identify with the characters, especially the one called me. We laugh and cry and fear and hope, all in response to images on a screen that we have mistaken for the world itself. But here is the thing about movies. They are not real. The characters are not real. The situations are not real. They are representations, symbols, patterns of light and shadow that suggest something but are not the thing itself. And thoughts are the same. They are not the reality they point to. The thought of a tree is not a tree. The thought of a person is not that person. The thought of yourself is not you. Thoughts are like maps, and maps are useful, but the map is never the territory. When awareness unsticks from thought, even for a moment, we step out of the movie theater and into the actual world. We discover that we have been living in a representation of reality rather than reality itself. And the actual world, when we meet it directly, is far more vivid, far more mysterious, far more alive than any movie could ever be. Let us explore a story that points to what happens when we lose ourselves in our own inner world and forget to pay attention to what is actually happening around us. Once there was a man who lived in a small dwelling in the countryside, in a row of similar dwellings that shared thin walls. He was a solitary sort, content with his own company, devoted to his hobbies and interests. Chief among these was his musical instrument, a rather loud one, with a droning, piercing quality that could be heard for quite a distance. He practiced for many hours each day, often late into the night. The music he made was deeply meaningful to him, a source of great satisfaction and pride. Now, on one side of his dwelling lived a young man, and on the other side lived an elderly woman. The walls between them were thin, as walls often are in such arrangements. Every sound passed through. One day, a visitor came to see the musician. They sat together drinking tea, and the visitor asked how he liked living in this place. The musician shook his head sadly. "The location is pleasant enough," he said, "but my neighbors are terrible. Simply terrible." "Oh? What is wrong with them?" "The young man on that side," the musician said, gesturing toward one wall. "He bangs his head against the wall constantly. Thump, thump, thump. At all hours. He must be quite disturbed in some way." "How strange," said the visitor. "And the old woman on the other side," the musician continued, gesturing the opposite direction. "She screams and screams. Terrible, anguish screaming. Sometimes it goes on for hours. I do not know what afflicts her, but it is most unpleasant to hear." The visitor looked concerned. "That sounds very difficult." How do you manage to live with such disturbance? The musician waved his hand dismissively. Oh, I just ignore them, he said. I stay here quietly, minding my own business, practicing my instrument. The visitor was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, they asked, "And when do you practice your instrument?" "Oh, many hours each day, often late into the night. It requires dedication, you know." "And your instrument," the visitor said slowly. "It is quite loud, is it not? With a piercing quality that carries through walls." The musician nodded proudly. "Yes, it has a powerful sound. Very resonant." The visitor looked at him with gentle eyes. "I wonder," they said, "if perhaps your neighbors are banging and screaming in response to your practicing. I wonder if you might be the source of their disturbance, just as they seem to be the source of yours." The musician stared at his visitor. This thought had never once occurred to him. He had been so absorbed in his own world, his own perspective, his own story about what was happening, that he could not see the larger picture. He was the reasonable one, the one just trying to live his life. They were the problem. But was that true? This is what happens when we are lost in the movie of our own minds. We become the center of a story in which we are the reasonable one, the one who is just trying to live our life, while others are the source of problems. We cannot see how our own actions and reactions are part of a larger pattern. We cannot see that the disturbance we perceive out there might be connected to something in here. The Buddha spoke of this tendency with great insight. He noticed that we go through life with what might be called a continuous sense of I and mine. I am the one who is affected. I am the one who matters. Mine is the perspective that is correct. Mine is the suffering that is real. This is not selfishness in the ordinary sense. It is simply how a mind that has forgotten its true nature operates. It is the wave, so identified with its own waveness that it cannot see the other waves as also being ocean. It is the one lost in the movie, unable to remember that everyone else in the theater is also watching their own movie, living in their own story, as convinced of its reality as we are of ours. When awareness unsticks, even briefly, something opens. We begin to see that our perspective is just one perspective among many. We begin to sense that our story is just one story among countless stories. We begin to feel a kind of kinship with others, a recognition that they too are caught in the same dream, struggling with the same stickiness, longing for the same freedom. There is a particular way that this stickiness affects our relationships with others. When we are lost in thought, lost in our stories about who people are, we cannot truly meet them. We meet our idea of them instead. We interact with a mental construction, a file we have built over time, rather than with the actual living being who is present. Think of someone you know well, someone you see often, a family member, perhaps, a friend, a colleague, someone whose face is familiar, whose voice you would recognize anywhere. When you encounter this person, what happens? Most likely, before they have even spoken, before they have done anything at all, you have already activated your mental file on them. You know who they are. You know what they are like. You know their history, their habits, their quirks. You know what bothers them and what delights them. You know what they will probably say and how they will probably react. You have years of data stored away, and it all comes flooding forward the moment you see their face. And then you relate to this file, this mental construction, rather than to the living, breathing, ever-changing being in front of you. You hear what you expect to hear. You see what you expect to see. They have become, in a strange way, frozen in your mind. A character in your movie, rather than a mystery that can never be fully known. This is natural. This is how minds work. We create categories and concepts to help us navigate the world efficiently. We would be overwhelmed if we had to meet everyone fresh every time, as if we had never seen them before. The mental files serve a purpose, but there is a cost. The cost is intimacy. The cost is presence. The cost is the freshness that comes from truly meeting another person as they are in this moment, rather than as we have decided they are based on who they were yesterday, last year, a decade ago. One teacher used to suggest a simple experiment. Bring someone to mind, he would say. Someone you care about. Let your thoughts about them arise. Your memories, your judgments, your expectations. Notice how these thoughts create a kind of image, a kind of representation of this person. And then, he would say, let all of that go. Drop the thoughts entirely. And see if you can sense this person in a different way. Not through concepts, but through something more direct. Through the heart, perhaps. Through the simple knowing of your connection with them. When people tried this, they often reported something surprising. Without the thoughts, there was a sense of presence that was quite different from the mental image. There was something more alive, more immediate, more real. It was as if the person themselves could finally be felt, rather than just thought about. This is what becomes possible when the stickiness releases. Not just in formal experiments, but in daily life. A moment of actual contact with another being, unfiltered by our stories about who they are. The Zen tradition has a wonderful phrase for this direct contact with reality. They call it beginner's mind. It is the mind that does not yet know, that has not yet categorized, that meets each moment fresh. In beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, one master said. In the expert's mind, there are few. The expert thinks they know. They have seen this before. They have this person figured out. They have life mapped and categorized and understood. And so they live in their maps, in their categories, in their understanding. They live in the movie. The beginner does not know. Each moment is new. Each person is a mystery. Each situation is unprecedented. And because of this not knowing, the beginner is available to what is actually happening. They can be surprised. They can learn. They can meet life on its own terms, rather than forcing it into predetermined boxes. We were all beginners once. When we were very young, before we had learned to categorize and judge and know, we met the world with this kind of openness. A face was a wonder. A sound was a miracle. A color was pure delight. We had not yet learned to be experts in living. The teachers suggest that this beginner's mind is not lost to us. It is not something we had and then misplaced forever. It is here now, beneath the layers of expertise, beneath the stickiness of thought, beneath the movie we have been watching for so long. It is the awareness itself, before it gets caught, before it identifies, before it forgets what it is. Perhaps you have noticed, in quiet moments, that there is something in you that is not lost in thought. Even when thoughts are arising, even when the movie is playing, there is something that is aware of the thoughts. Something that watches the movie without being entirely absorbed in it. This is what the teachers are pointing to when they speak of awareness. Not the contents of awareness, not the thoughts and emotions and sensations, but awareness itself. The knowing quality, the open space in which everything appears. There is a story about a student who came to a teacher with this very question. The student had been practicing for some time, sitting in silence, watching the breath, trying to quiet the mind. But no matter how hard they tried, thoughts kept arising. An endless stream of them. "Teacher," the student said, "I cannot stop my thoughts. I sit, and still they come. Thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, thoughts about whether I am doing this right, thoughts about thoughts. I am failing at this practice." The teacher smiled gently. "Tell me," she said, "when you notice that you have been lost in thought, who is it that notices?" The student paused. "I do, I suppose. And this one who notices," the teacher continued, "is this one also a thought?" The student considered this carefully. "No," they said slowly. "The noticing itself is not a thought. It is something else." "Yes," the teacher said, "that something else is what you are looking for. You have been trying to stop the clouds, but you do not need to stop the clouds. You only need to recognize the sky." The student sat with this for a long moment. "But the thoughts are so loud," they said, "so persistent. How can I find the sky when the clouds are so thick?" "The sky does not mind the clouds," the teacher replied. "Thick or thin, many or few, the sky remains unchanged. It is only when you believe you are a cloud that you suffer. When you recognize yourself as sky, the clouds can come and go as they please. They are no longer your concern." This is what the teachers are pointing to. Not a state without thoughts, which may never come, but a recognition of what is aware of thoughts. A shift in identity from the contents of awareness to awareness itself. This awareness is not sticky. It does not attach to anything. Thoughts arise in it and pass away, like clouds moving through the sky, and awareness remains unchanged. Emotions arise in it and dissolve, like waves rising and falling on the ocean, and awareness remains undisturbed. When we recognize this awareness, when we begin to sense it as what we truly are, rather than what we are aware of, something shifts. The stickiness begins to loosen. Not through effort, not through trying to stop thoughts, but simply through recognition. We see that we are not the thoughts. We are what knows the thoughts. And in that seeing, a kind of freedom becomes available. Not freedom from thoughts, because thoughts continue to arise, but freedom from being lost in them, freedom from mistaking them for reality, freedom to rest in the open space while the movie continues to play. There is a lovely image from the Buddhist tradition. It compares thoughts to writing on water. Have you ever tried to write on the surface of a pool or stream? Your finger traces a shape, but the water immediately closes behind it. The writing does not persist. The water returns to smoothness almost instantly. Thoughts seen clearly are like this. They arise, they seem vivid and important for a moment, and then they dissolve. They have no lasting substance. They leave no trace. The mind returns to its natural openness, its natural clarity, its natural peace. But when awareness is sticky, when we are caught in the movie, thoughts seem solid and real. They seem to persist. They seem to define us and our situation. We take them so seriously, as if they were carved in stone, rather than written on water. The shift from stickiness to freedom is not about changing the thoughts. It is about changing our relationship to them. It is about recognizing their water-like nature, their arising and passing, their lack of ultimate substance. It is about trusting the openness that remains when any particular thought has dissolved. As we rest here together, perhaps you can sense something of this. The thoughts that have been arising as you listen, where are they now? The thoughts from a moment ago, from a minute ago, from the beginning of this reflection, where have they gone? They wrote themselves on the water of awareness and then vanished, leaving no trace. You might try to recall what you were thinking about 5 minutes ago. Perhaps you can retrieve some fragment, some echo. But the thought itself, the actual thinking that happened in that moment, is gone. It arose, it seemed important, or interesting, or worrying for a brief time, and then it dissolved back into the nothing from which it came. And yet awareness remains. You remain. The knowing in which everything appears has not been diminished by the passing of thoughts. It has not been marked or stained by any of them. A million thoughts could arise and pass away, and still awareness would be here, unchanged, unharmed, as open and clear as it ever was. This is your true nature. Not the sticky mind that gets lost in movies. Not the expert who thinks they know everything about everyone. Not the character in the drama who takes everything so personally. But this open, clear, knowing space that welcomes everything and holds on to nothing. That allows all things to arise and all things to pass. That remains at peace no matter what stories are playing on the screen. The stickiness will return. The mind will get caught again in its stories. This is not a problem. This is not failure. This is simply how minds work, how they have always worked. The invitation is not to stop the stickiness forever, which may not even be possible, but to notice when it has happened and to recognize, again and again, the awareness that was never actually lost. Let us pause for a moment now and let what we just heard settle in. And when you are ready, we will continue together. We have been exploring the nature of this sticky mind, how it latches onto thoughts and carries us away into movies of its own making. And we have begun to sense that there is something else here, something that is not caught in the movie, something that remains open and clear even when thoughts are swirling. Now we come to a deeper question. A question that has been asked by seekers for thousands of years, in many different lands, in many different ways. It is perhaps the most important question we can ask. Who is aware? Not what are you aware of? Not what thoughts are arising or what emotions are present or what sensations are happening in the body. But who is aware of all this? What is this awareness itself? The teachers invite us to turn attention around. Instead of always looking outward at the objects of experience, we are invited to look back at the one who is experiencing. Instead of watching the movie, we are invited to look at the one who is watching. This is sometimes called looking into the mirror. Not a mirror that shows us our face, but a mirror that shows us what we truly are. There is a story from long ago, from a time when seekers would travel great distances to find teachers who could help them understand the nature of mind. It is a story about a young man who was deeply troubled and an old sage who lived alone in a cave in the mountains. The young man had heard of this sage from other travelers he met along dusty roads and in simple wayside inns. They spoke of his wisdom, his penetrating insight, his ability to see through to the heart of things. Some said he had sat in that cave for 9 years, barely moving, barely speaking, simply resting in a peace that nothing could disturb. Others said he had come from a land far to the west, carrying teachings that could liberate the mind from all suffering. The young man was not at peace. His mind was a torment to him. Thoughts raced and churned like a river in flood. Worries multiplied like weeds in a neglected garden. Regrets about the past tangled with fears about the future until he could not tell one from the other. He could not sleep well. He could not rest. Even in moments of apparent calm, when he sat in a quiet place and tried to find some stillness, there was an undercurrent of agitation, a feeling that something was terribly wrong, that he was terribly wrong. He had tried many things. He had studied with other teachers. He had practiced various methods for calming the mind. He had read the ancient texts and memorized their teachings. But nothing had helped. The torment continued. The thoughts kept coming. He decided he would find this sage and ask for help. It was his last hope. The journey took many weeks. He crossed rivers swollen with spring rain, balancing on slippery stones. He climbed mountain paths so steep and narrow that one misstep would send him tumbling into the void. He slept in the open when no shelter could be found, shivering under his thin blanket as the stars wheeled overhead. He ate what little food he had brought and what he could find along the way, berries and roots, and the occasional gift from a kind farmer. But he did not turn back. The suffering in his mind drove him forward like a wind at his back. At last, after many hardships, he came to the cave. It was a simple opening in the rock face, high on a mountainside, overlooking a vast valley where clouds drifted below like a second ocean. The entrance was partially hidden by scraggly bushes and worn stones. Inside, in the dim light that filtered through, sat an old man. His eyes were closed. His body was still as a statue. He seemed to be barely breathing. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, but there was a quality of peace in his features that the young man had never seen before. It was as if this old man had found something that others spent their whole lives seeking and never found. The young man waited at the entrance of the cave. He did not want to disturb the sage's meditation. But after some time, the old man's eyes opened. They were clear and bright, like mountain pools. He looked at the young man without surprise, as if he had been expecting him. "Please," the young man said, his voice breaking with desperation. "Please help me quiet my mind. I cannot bear it any longer. The thoughts never stop. They torment me day and night. I have tried everything I know to make them cease, but nothing works. Please, if you have any wisdom, share it with me." The sage looked at him for a long moment. His face was calm, compassionate, untroubled by the young man's distress. "Bring me your mind," the sage said quietly. "Bring me this mind that troubles you so, and I will quiet it for you." The young man was startled by this response. Bring his mind? What did that mean? How could he bring his mind to someone? "I do not understand," he said. "How can I bring you my mind?" "Go and look for it," the sage replied. "Find this mind that is causing you such suffering. When you have found it, bring it to me." The young man sat down at the entrance of the cave. He turned his attention inward, searching for this mind that had tormented him for so long. He looked for the thoughts, but when he looked, they seemed to dissolve. He looked for the thinker behind the thoughts, but he could not find anyone there. He looked for the one who was suffering, but all he found was looking itself. He searched and searched. Where was this mind? Where was this self that was so troubled? It had seemed so solid, so real, so present. But when he turned to face it directly, there was nothing to find. Only awareness, open and empty, looking for something that could not be located. After some time, he looked up at the sage with wonder in his eyes. "I cannot find it," he said. "I have looked everywhere, but I cannot find my mind." The sage smiled, a gentle smile full of warmth. "There," he said, "I have now quieted your mind." This story points to something that words can barely touch. When we look for the mind, we cannot find it. When we search for the self, the one who is thinking, the one who is suffering, the one who is seeking peace, we find nothing solid there. We find only awareness itself, open and knowing, without boundaries or center. This is not a trick. This is not a clever philosophical point. It is something we can discover for ourselves in our own direct experience. When we stop looking at the contents of awareness and instead look for awareness itself, something remarkable happens. The solidity we assumed was there begins to dissolve. The self we were so sure existed begins to seem more like a mirage, a pattern of thoughts that creates an illusion of substance. The Buddhist tradition calls this emptiness. But emptiness does not mean nothingness, a blank void, an absence of everything. It means empty of what we thought was there, empty of a solid, separate self, empty of a thinker behind the thoughts. When we look for the one who is looking, we find nothing to grasp, nothing to hold on to. And in that finding of no thing, there is a profound release. One teacher described this experience using the image of mist in the sky. Imagine an early morning in a mountain valley. The sun has not yet risen above the peaks, but the sky is lightening, turning from black to deep blue to the soft gray of approaching dawn. And rising from the valley floor, from the streams and the wet meadows and the dark forests, mist begins to appear. It rises in soft columns and gentle curtains. It drifts through the air, catching what little light there is, glowing faintly. It has a certain form, a certain density. You can see it move and shift and change, carried by currents of air too subtle to feel. For a time, it seems substantial, almost solid, a presence in the world. And then the sun rises. Golden light spills over the mountain peaks and pours down into the valley. And in that warmth, the mist begins to disappear. It thins and fades. It loses its form. Where once there were dense curtains of white, now there is only clear air. Where once the mist seemed so real, so present, now there is nothing but the vast blue sky. Where did the mist come from? We might say it came from the water in the valley, evaporating in the cool night air. But where did it really come from? And where did it go? If you search for the mist after it has dissolved, you will not find it anywhere. It has returned to the space that was always there, the space that held it while it appeared and remained unchanged when it vanished. Thoughts are like this mist. They arise in the space of awareness. They seem substantial for a moment, real and important, demanding our attention. They move and shift and create patterns. Sometimes they seem dense and overwhelming, like fog so thick we cannot see our hand in front of our face. And then, in the light of attention, in the warmth of awareness, they dissolve, leaving no trace. The awareness that held them remains, clear and open, untouched by their coming and going. This is what the ancient texts mean when they say that thoughts are empty. They have no solid core. They have no permanent existence. They are like writing on water, like drawings in the air, like footprints of birds in the sky. You can see the bird fly past. You can watch its wings move through the air. But look for the path it has traveled, and you will find nothing there. The sky holds no record of the flight. The air closes behind the wings as if they had never passed. When we look back at our own thoughts, we find this same quality. Where did that thought come from? We cannot say. Where did it go? We cannot find it. What remains when the thought has passed? Just this open, clear awareness, unchanged, untroubled, at peace. There was once a seeker who traveled to visit a teacher known for her clarity. The seeker had many questions, many things she wanted to understand. She had read books and attended lectures and practiced various techniques. She had sat in silence for hours, watching her breath, trying to quiet her thoughts. She had studied the ancient texts, memorizing their words, pondering their meanings. But still something eluded her. She felt she had not touched the truth that the teachings pointed to. It remained abstract, conceptual, always just out of reach. When she arrived at the teacher's dwelling, a modest house, at the edge of a small village, the teacher welcomed her kindly and offered her tea. They sat together in a simple room with white walls and wooden floors. Sunlight fell through the window in golden bars. The sounds of birds came from the garden outside, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then was silent. The seeker noticed that the teacher moved with a particular quality of presence. When she poured the tea, she poured the tea. When she sat, she sat. There was no sense of distraction, no feeling that her mind was elsewhere. She was simply here, doing what she was doing, fully and completely. "I have come to ask about the nature of mind," the seeker said, setting down her teacup. "I have studied and practiced for many years, but I still do not understand. When the teachings speak of awareness, of emptiness, of the true self, I do not know what they mean. I hear the words, I can repeat them, I can even explain them to others, but I cannot find what they point to in my own experience. It is as if everyone is pointing at the moon, and I can only see their fingers." The teacher nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "This is a common difficulty," she said. "Perhaps the most common of all. We hear the words and try to grasp them with the thinking mind. We try to understand awareness as if it were another object to be known, another concept to be learned. But awareness is not an object. It is what knows all objects. It cannot be seen as a thing because it is not a thing. It is what is seeing. Then how can I find it?" The seeker asked, leaning forward. "How can I know what cannot be seen? How can I find what is doing the finding?" "Look at me," the teacher said. "Right now, in this moment, look at my face." The seeker looked. She saw the teacher's eyes, dark and clear. She saw the lines that time had etched around her mouth. She saw the grey in her hair, the particular shape of her nose, the way the light fell across her cheek. "Now," the teacher continued, her voice soft, "notice that you are seeing. There is seeing happening. Not you doing the seeing, but seeing itself, present and alive. Colors are appearing, shapes are forming, the image of my face is arising. Seeing is present. Can you notice that? Not what is seen, but that there is seeing. Yes, the seeker said slowly. Yes, I think so. Now, without looking away from my face, without moving your eyes, see if you can notice what is seeing. Not the object being seen, but the seeing itself. Not what is looked at, but what is looking. The seeker tried. Her eyes remained on the teacher's face, but her attention shifted somehow. She was no longer focused on the features before her, but on something else. Something harder to name. What do you find? The teacher asked gently. The seeker was quiet for a moment. I find nothing. I mean, I cannot find a thing. There is just openness, just knowing, but no thing that is knowing. Yes, the teacher said, smiling. That is it. That openness, that knowing without a knower, that is what the teachings point to. It is not far away. It is not hidden. It is simply overlooked because we are always looking at objects, never at what perceives them. But it seems so ordinary, the seeker said. So simple. I expected something more dramatic. The teacher laughed softly. This is always the surprise. We imagine that awakening must be spectacular, a fireworks display of spiritual experience. But the truth is utterly simple. It is simply this, simply what is already here. The most ordinary thing in the world because it is present in every moment of experience. And the most extraordinary because it is what we truly are. This simplicity can be hard to accept. We have been taught that spiritual truth must be complicated, that enlightenment must be rare and difficult to attain. We have been told stories of seekers who struggled for years, who underwent great hardships, who finally achieved some exalted state that ordinary people could never reach. But the teachers who have seen clearly tell us something different. They tell us that what we are looking for is not far away. It is not the result of a long journey. It is here, now, in this very moment. It is the awareness that is reading these words. It is the knowing in which all experience arises. One master put it this way: what you are looking for is what is looking. Read that again if you like. Let it sink in. What you are looking for, this peace, this freedom, this truth you have been seeking, is not an object to be found. It is the very awareness that is doing the seeking. It is closer than close, nearer than near. You cannot get away from it because it is what you are. This is why the search can feel so frustrating. We are looking for something that is already here. We are seeking what we already are. It is like a fish swimming through the ocean, searching desperately for water. The ancient teachings use many images to point to this truth. They speak of the sky and the clouds. The clouds come and go, changing shape, gathering and dispersing. But the sky remains. It is not disturbed by the clouds. It does not become cloudy just because clouds are present. It holds the clouds, allows them to pass, and remains vast and open throughout. They speak of the ocean and the waves. The waves rise and fall, each one unique, each one temporary. But the ocean is not disturbed. It is not diminished when a wave dissolves. It is not increased when a wave arises. It simply is what it is, the vast body of water in which all waves appear and disappear. They speak of a mirror and the reflections that appear in it. The mirror reflects everything placed before it, beautiful things and ugly things, pleasant things and unpleasant things. But the mirror is never stained by what it reflects. It remains clear and unmarked, simply showing what is there, without grasping or rejecting anything. Awareness is like this. It is the sky in which all mental clouds appear. It is the ocean from which all waves of thought and emotion arise. It is the mirror that reflects all experience without being changed by any of it. And this awareness is not something other than us. It is what we most fundamentally are. You might wonder what happens when we recognize this. What changes when we see that we are the sky and not the clouds? What shifts when we know ourselves as the ocean and not just the waves? Is life different? Does suffering end? Do we walk through our days in some kind of permanent bliss? The honest answer is nothing and everything. Nothing changes in the sense that awareness has always been what we are. We do not become something new. We do not gain something we lacked. We do not travel to a new place or achieve a new state. The sky was always present, even when we thought we were clouds. The ocean was always there, even when we identified as waves. Recognition is not creation. It is simply seeing what was always true. The thoughts continue to arise. The emotions continue to move through. The body continues to feel what it feels. Life continues to bring its mixture of pleasant and unpleasant, easy and difficult, light and shadow. Nothing stops. Nothing is eliminated. The contents of experience go on as they always have. And everything changes in the sense that suffering loses its grip. When we know ourselves as the sky, the clouds can come and go without disturbing our peace. We watch them drift past with a kind of tender interest, but we do not feel that we are being attacked when a dark cloud appears. When we know ourselves as the ocean, the waves can rise and fall without threatening our existence. We feel them move through us, but we do not fear that we will be destroyed when a large wave comes. The contents of experience continue, but we are no longer at their mercy. We are no longer fighting against the flow of life. This does not mean we become cold or detached, indifferent to life and its joys and sorrows. Quite the opposite. When we are no longer defending a fragile sense of self, when we are no longer bracing against experience, when we are no longer running from what we fear and grasping at what we want, something opens. The heart opens. We become more available, more present, more tender. Love flows more freely because it is no longer obstructed by fear. Compassion arises more naturally because we are no longer so preoccupied with protecting ourselves. There is a beautiful verse from an old Zen poem that speaks to this. It says, "All beings are Buddha nature, just as ice is water. Apart from water, there is no ice. Apart from beings, no Buddha." What this means is that we are not separate from what we seek. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The ice is not separate from the water. Whatever we call that vast, free, peaceful awareness, whether we call it Buddha nature or true self or simple presence, it is not other than us. It is what we are made of. It is what we have always been. The poem continues, "How sad that people ignore the near and search for truth afar. They are like one who, in the midst of water, cries out in thirst. We are in the midst of water. We are surrounded by, made of, this awareness we seek. And yet we cry out in thirst, convinced that what we need is somewhere else. that peace is in the future, that freedom requires some achievement we have not yet managed. But it is here. It has always been here. The recognition of this is not the end of something but the beginning. Not the completion of a journey but the discovery that we never left home. As we rest here together, perhaps something of this is becoming clear. Not as an idea to believe, but as something to taste directly. The awareness that is hearing these words, the knowing in which sounds appear, and thoughts arise, and sensations come and go. This awareness is not far away. It is not hidden. It is simply what is happening right now, in this very moment. You do not need to create it. You do not need to achieve it. You only need to notice that it is already here, already present, already what you are. The sage in the cave did not give the young man something new. He simply pointed him back to what was always there. When the young man looked for his mind and could not find it, he discovered the peace he had been seeking. Not because something was added, but because the illusion of a solid, separate, suffering self was seen through. The teacher in the simple room did not transmit some special power to the seeker. She simply invited her to notice what was already present, what had always been present, what could never be absent. The awareness that knows, the openness that holds all experience, the mirror that reflects without being stained. This is the looking into the mirror that reveals not a face, but a vast, open space. A space that is not empty of everything, but full of knowing, full of presence, full of this moment exactly as it is. Let us pause for a moment. Let your body relax, and when you are ready, we will continue together. We have traveled far together. We have seen the exhaustion that comes from trying to become somebody. We have glimpsed the freedom that cannot be imprisoned. We have sensed the mystery beneath our certainties and remembered the ocean that we never stop being. We have noticed how the mind gets sticky, how it carries us away into movies of its own making. And we have looked into the mirror and found not a solid self, but an open, clear awareness that holds everything and clings to nothing. Now we come to the heart of it all, the simplest truth, the one that has been waiting for us since the beginning. Nothing is missing. These words can sound like a greeting card sentiment, something to embroider on a pillow or print on a coffee mug. But the teachers who speak them mean something much deeper. They are pointing to this very moment, exactly as it is, and saying, "Here, this is it. This is what you have been looking for. Not somewhere else. Not in the future. Not after you have improved or achieved or understood. Here, now. Is anything missing in this moment?" This is not a rhetorical question. It is an invitation to actually look, to examine your present experience with fresh eyes, to set aside, just for a moment, all the stories about what should be different, what needs to happen, what is wrong with you, or your life, or the world, and simply to ask, right now, in this actual moment of experience, is anything missing? There is breathing happening. There is awareness, knowing this moment. There are sounds, perhaps, arising and passing. There is the feeling of the body, resting wherever it is resting. There is this, whatever this is, simple and immediate and utterly present. What is missing from this? The mind will have answers, of course. The mind always has answers. It will say, well, I would like to be healthier, or wealthier, or more at peace. I would like my relationships to be better. I would like the world to be less troubled. I would like to be enlightened, or at least to feel better than I do right now. And all of these desires are natural. There is nothing wrong with wanting things to be different. The human heart longs for fulfillment, for connection, for peace. This longing is not the problem. But notice something. The mind is answering a different question. It is telling you what it wants to be different in the future, or what it wishes had been different in the past. It is not actually examining this moment, right now, as it is. When we look directly at present experience, not at our thoughts about it, but at the actual living reality of this moment, something surprising can be discovered. It is complete. Not in the sense that nothing will ever change, or that we should not take action to improve our lives and our world, but complete in the sense that this moment is whole unto itself. It lacks nothing that it needs to be exactly what it is. A great teacher once said, without desire, everything is sufficient. With seeking, myriad things are impoverished. This does not mean we should never want anything, or never try to change anything. It means that the sense of lack we carry, the feeling that something is missing, is not actually a property of this moment. It is something we add to this moment with our thoughts. When the thoughts of lack fall away, even for a second, we find ourselves resting in a completeness that was always here. There is a story about a practitioner who went on a long retreat, hoping to find the peace that had eluded them for so many years. They had read all the right books, studied the ancient texts, memorized the teachings until they could recite them in their sleep. They had studied with respected teachers, traveling to distant places to sit at their feet and receive their wisdom. They understood, intellectually, what the teachings were pointing to. They could explain it to others with clarity and conviction, but they had not tasted it for themselves. It remained an idea, a concept, something they believed in but did not know directly. On this retreat, which took place at a small center in the mountains, far from the distractions of daily life, they practiced diligently. They rose before dawn and sat in the meditation hall as the first light crept over the peaks. They watched the breath, counting inhalations and exhalations, noting the arising and passing of thoughts like a scientist observing specimens. They followed the instructions carefully, applying the techniques they had learned with precision and dedication. And they tried very hard to experience emptiness. They tried to see through the illusion of self. They tried to touch the freedom that the teachers described in such beautiful terms. They strained toward awakening as if it were a destination they could reach through sheer force of will. But the harder they tried, the more frustrated they became. Their mind did not quiet. If anything, it seemed busier than ever, filled with thoughts about whether they were doing the practice correctly, comparisons with how others seemed to be progressing, fantasies about what enlightenment would feel like when it finally arrived. Their sense of self did not dissolve. It seemed to grow stronger, more defended, more desperate. Emptiness remained a word on a page, not a living experience. They began to despair. Perhaps they were not suited for this path. Perhaps there was something fundamentally wrong with them, some defect that prevented them from awakening. Perhaps enlightenment was for other people, special people, not ordinary people like them. One evening, after several days of this struggle, they sat alone in the meditation hall. The others had gone to bed, tired from the day's practice. The room was dark except for a single candle that flickered on the altar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees, making a sound like distant water. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its voice hollow and haunting. The practitioner sat there, exhausted, not just physically tired, but tired in a deeper way. Tired of trying, tired of failing, tired of the endless project of becoming someone other than who they were. They had nothing left. No more techniques to try. No more effort to give. They had reached the end of their rope and there was nowhere else to go. And in that moment of complete giving up, something shifted. They were not trying anymore. They were not seeking emptiness or peace or any particular experience. They were not evaluating their progress or comparing themselves to anyone. They were just sitting there, tired and defeated, listening to the wind in the pines. Just this. Just what was actually happening. Nothing more. And they noticed, with a kind of quiet surprise, that this was enough. This moment, exactly as it was, with its tiredness and its darkness and its distant owl, was complete. There was nothing missing from it. There never had been. The peace they had been seeking was not somewhere else. It was not a result of proper technique or sufficient effort. It was here, in the simple fact of being present. It was what remained when they stopped trying to get somewhere different from where they already were. They laughed softly to themselves in the dark room. All that seeking, all that effort, and what they wanted had been here the whole time, patiently waiting for them to stop running past it. This is what the teachers mean when they speak of natural mind. It is not a special state that we achieve through practice. It is what is here when we stop trying to achieve anything at all. It is the mind at rest in its own nature, before we add anything to it, before we try to make it different from what it is. One instruction that has helped many people points to this with beautiful simplicity. It says, loosen loosely, not loosen tightly, with effort and strain. Not try hard to relax, but loosen loosely. Let go of letting go. Relax the one who is trying to relax. When we do this, when we truly give up the project of getting somewhere, we find that we are already here. We find that natural mind is not something we need to create or achieve. It is what remains when we stop adding to this moment. Another teacher put it this way: the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When we stop preferring this moment to be different from what it is, we discover that this moment is fine. More than fine. It is complete, whole, lacking nothing. There is a poem from an old Zen master that speaks to this with particular beauty. It goes something like this: all beings, without exception, are Buddha nature. Just as ice by nature is water, apart from water there is no ice. Apart from beings, no Buddha. How sad that people ignore the near and search for truth far away. Like one who, in the midst of water, cries out in thirst. Like a child of a wealthy home wandering among the poor. The poem continues: those who hear this truth, even once, and listen with a grateful heart, treasuring it, revering it, gain blessings without end. Much more, those who turn about and bear witness to their own nature, discover that this nature is no nature at all. They go far beyond mere doctrine. How boundless and free is the sky of awareness. How bright the full moon of wisdom. Truly, is anything missing now? This very place is the lotus paradise. This very body, the Buddha. These words were written many centuries ago, but they speak directly to our situation today. We search far away for something that is near. We cry out in thirst while standing in water. We wander looking for home while we are already sitting in our own living room. The lotus paradise, the realm of peace and freedom that the traditions speak of, is not somewhere else. It is this very place, this room where you are resting, this moment where you are breathing, this awareness that is hearing these words. But we do not believe it. This is the strange thing. We hear the words, and something in us resonates, recognizes their truth. And yet we keep seeking, keep striving, keep believing that what we want is somewhere else. There is a story about a traveler who was making a long journey. They had been walking for many days, through forests where the light fell green and dappled, over mountains where the air was thin and cold, through rain that soaked their clothes and sun that burned their neck. They were tired,